Okay, so today I want to talk about Iran. And specifically, I want to answer one question. Why will Iran never surrender? Not in this war, not in any war. Okay? And to understand that, you have to go back, way back. Not to 1979, not to the revolution. You have to go back thousands of years, because what drives Iran today has nothing to do with politics. It has everything to do with something much deeper than that. So the first thing you need to understand about Iran is that before Islam, before the Arabs, before any of this, Iran was Persia. And Persia gave the world something that most people have never heard of. It's called Zoroastrianism. Okay? And Zoroastrianism was the first eschatological religion in human history, meaning it was the first religion that said there is an end to the world, there is a judgment day, and on that day, every single human being will be judged. Not by how wealthy they were, not by how powerful they were, not by how famous they were, but by one thing only. Did you live in truth or did you live in the lie? Okay, the truth in Zoroastrianism is called Asha, and the lie is called Druj. And this is not just a religious concept. This is a civilizational DNA. This gets passed down generation after generation. And what it creates is a people who are not motivated by winning. They are motivated by being right, by being on the correct side of history, by fighting for what is true, even if they lose. Okay? Does that make sense? And here is something else about Persia that almost nobody talks about. At its height, the Persian Empire was the largest empire the world had ever seen, stretching from modern-day Greece all the way to the borders of India. And the way the Persians ran that empire was unique. They did not erase the cultures they conquered, they absorbed them. They celebrated them. Cyrus the Great, and I want you to remember that name, Cyrus the Great, issued what many historians consider the world's first human rights charter. He freed enslaved peoples. He let conquered populations practice their own religions. He is literally mentioned in the Bible as a liberator, okay? So what you have is a civilization that at its absolute peak was not just militarily dominant, it was morally dominant. And that memory does not go away. That pride does not go away. When Iranians look at the world today, they are not looking at it as a small, struggling nation surrounded by enemies. They are looking at it as the heirs of Cyrus, as a civilization that was once the center of the known world and genuinely believes it has a destiny to lead again, okay? Now, on top of that, you layer Shia Islam. And Shia Islam adds something very specific to this foundation. It adds the theology of martyrdom. So here is what happened. After the Prophet Muhammad died, the Muslim world split into two groups. The Sunnis believed that any qualified person could lead the Muslim world. The Shia believed something different. They believed that leadership must come from the bloodline of the Prophet himself, that only a descendant of Muhammad has the spiritual authority to be the leader of all Muslims, okay? And because of this difference, and this is important, the Shia have been the minority in the Muslim world for over 1,000 years. They have been oppressed, they have been persecuted, they have been surrounded, and they have kept fighting anyway. And the reason why goes back to one single moment in history, the Battle of Karbala, 680 AD. Imam Hussein, the grandson of the Prophet Muhammad, stood up against the ruling caliphate. The caliphate sent an army of thousands. Hussein had 72 men, and he was going to lose. He knew he was walking into death, and he went anyway. Because in the Shia world view, it is not victory that gives you honor. It is the willingness to die for what is right, okay? And every single year, hundreds of millions of Shia Muslims around the world relive that moment. It is called Ashura. And during Ashura, people weep, people beat their chests, people walk through the streets in mourning. And what they are doing is not just remembering a battle from 1400 years ago. They are renewing a vow. They're saying, we are still Hussein. We are still the righteous few. We are still willing to die before we surrender to injustice. Okay? That is not a political slogan. That is a sacred covenant that is renewed every single year. Think about how powerful that is. So what you have in Iran is this extraordinary combination. You have a pre-Islamic Persian tradition that says live in truth regardless of the consequences. And you have an Islamic tradition that says dying for your beliefs is not a tragedy. It is the highest form of honor. These two things together create something that no military on earth knows how to defeat. Because you cannot threaten someone who has already accepted death. You cannot break someone whose identity is built around surviving against impossible odds, okay? Now let's talk about the grand strategy, because Iran is not just surviving, Iran has a plan. And the plan is called Shia exceptionalism. The idea is this: the Muslim world has over 8 billion people, and right now, the center of the Sunni Muslim world is Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has Mecca. Saudi Arabia has the oil. Saudi Arabia has the money and the relationships with the West. And Iran looks at Saudi Arabia and says, that should be us. Not because of oil, not because of money, but because we are the legitimate spiritual heirs to the tradition of the Prophet, okay? And so everything Iran does in the Middle East, the Houthis in Yemen, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Gaza, the influence operations in Iraq and Syria, all of it is part of one coherent strategy. Surround Saudi Arabia, slowly drain it, and one day become the undisputed center of the entire Muslim world, okay? That is the Iranian grand strategy. And it has been consistent for 40 years, regardless of who is in power in Tehran. And I want to stop here for a second because this is important. People in the West look at Iran and they see chaos. For decades, Western policymakers, intelligence agencies, and military strategists have repeated the same prediction about Iran, that the system is fragile, the regime is unstable, the economy is collapsing, and the people are on the verge of overthrowing the state. They point to protests in the streets, inflation, political infighting, sanctions, and international isolation as evidence that the country is nearing its breaking point. Yet the remarkable reality is that this prediction has been repeated for more than 40 years. And for 40 years, it has failed to materialize. What many outside observers interpret as chaos is often, from within the Iranian experience, something entirely different: resilience. The Iranian state possesses an extraordinary capacity to absorb pressure, survive crisis, and continue functioning under conditions that would cripple many other nations. That endurance is not accidental. It is rooted deeply in a civilizational memory shaped by centuries of invasion, hardship, sacrifice, and survival. To understand modern Iran, one must understand that Iranians do not see history the way many Western powers do. This is a civilization that endured the invasion of Alexander the Great, survived the Arab conquest, rebuilt after the devastation of the Mongol invasions, resisted foreign domination during the era of British and Russian influence, and endured one of the bloodiest conflicts of the modern Middle East during the Iran-Iraq War. During that 8-year war, Saddam Hussein received extensive backing from major Western and regional powers, while Iran faced isolation and destruction on a massive scale. Entire cities were bombed, chemical weapons were used against Iranian forces, and hundreds of thousands died. Yet the Iranian system survived. More importantly, the collective memory of that survival became embedded into the national identity itself. Over generations, a society shaped by repeated existential struggles develops a fundamentally different relationship with suffering. In many political systems, hardship is interpreted as proof of failure. In the Iranian worldview, hardship often becomes proof of resistance. Pain is not automatically associated with defeat. Instead, it is seen as evidence that the struggle itself remains alive. This mentality is inseparable from both Persian civilizational history and the deeply influential traditions of Shia Islam. The story of Imam Hussein at Karbala, standing against overwhelming odds while refusing surrender, is not viewed merely as religious history. It functions as a moral framework through which sacrifice, resistance, and endurance are interpreted. For many Iranians, especially those aligned with the ideology of the Islamic Republic, external pressure does not necessarily weaken resolve. It can strengthen it. This is one of the greatest misunderstandings in the West's approach toward Iran. Policymakers often assume that sanctions, assassinations, military strikes, and economic isolation will eventually force capitulation. Yet Iran has lived under sanctions for decades. Its military figures have been assassinated. Its nuclear scientists have been targeted. Its regional allies and proxy networks have been bombed repeatedly. Critical infrastructure has been sabotaged. And despite all of this, Iran's regional influence has in many ways expanded rather than diminished. From Lebanon to Iraq, from Syria to Yemen, Iran has continued building networks of influence that allow it to project power asymmetrically across the region. Why? Because pressure applied against a society built around narratives of resistance can produce the opposite of the intended effect. Rather than convincing the population that resistance is hopeless, external attacks can reinforce the belief that Iran is engaged in a righteous struggle against larger and more powerful adversaries. Every sanction becomes evidence of foreign hostility. Every military strike becomes confirmation that Iran remains under siege. In this worldview, endurance itself becomes victory. The state does not need prosperity alone to maintain legitimacy. It also derives legitimacy from survival. The nuclear program represents perhaps the clearest example of this mindset. In Washington and many Western capitals, Iran's nuclear ambitions are viewed primarily through the lens of proliferation and regional security threats. But within Iran, the nuclear program is often understood very differently. It is seen not merely as a technological project, but as a symbol of sovereignty and deterrence. Iranian leaders observed what happened to regimes that lacked sufficient deterrent capability. Muammar Gaddafi abandoned Libya's weapons programs and later lost power during NATO intervention. Saddam Hussein, despite not possessing active weapons of mass destruction at the time of the Iraq invasion, was overthrown by foreign military force. From Tehran's perspective, these events delivered a brutal lesson. States without credible deterrence remain vulnerable to regime change. As a result, many within Iran reached a strategic conclusion that they consider entirely rational. The only true guarantee of sovereignty in the modern international system is the ability to make foreign intervention unbearably costly, whether through missile programs, proxy networks, strategic depth, or nuclear capability. The objective is not necessarily conquest. It is survival. Western officials may interpret this posture as aggressive expansionism, but Iranian strategists often see it as defensive realism shaped by historical experience. This is why repeated calls for Iran to simply surrender its regional influence, dismantle its alliances, or fully integrate into an American-led regional order are often viewed in Tehran as fundamentally unrealistic. From the Iranian perspective, such demands are not perceived as compromises. They are perceived as existential concessions. To abandon resistance would mean abandoning the very historical narrative upon which the modern Iranian state has constructed its identity. It would mean rejecting centuries of cultural memory centered around independence, sacrifice, and survival against overwhelming odds. For many Iranians, the issue is therefore not simply political, it is civilizational. It touches questions of identity, dignity, sovereignty, and historical continuity. The concept of righteous resistance, rooted in Persian heritage, Shia theology, and national experience, remains central to how many interpret the country's role in the world. That does not mean all Iranians support every policy of the government, nor does it mean there is no internal dissent or frustration. Iran is a deeply complex society with competing visions for its future. But what outside powers consistently underestimate is the depth of the collective memory that shapes how pressure from abroad is interpreted. This is ultimately why Iran has proven so difficult to coerce into submission. Not because the country is irrational, not because its people seek endless conflict, but because within this worldview, surrender is seen as more dangerous than suffering. The greatest fear is not destruction itself, it is the loss of sovereignty, identity, and the moral conviction that resistance matters. Until the outside world fully understands the historical and psychological foundations behind that mindset, not only the politics, not only the religion, but the weight of an entire civilization's memory, much of the conflict surrounding Iran will continue to appear incomprehensible from the outside looking in.